Day 5 through Isaiah, chapters 13 to 15, and today we read further complex verses. This really is a very intense section of the Bible as we read these first 15 chapters of Isaiah. So today he is referring to the judgment of God upon Babylon. Babylon, of course, was still a rising power in the time of Isaiah. The dominant world power at the time was Assyria, but Babylon would go on to conquer the Assyrians and become the world power under Nebuchadnezzar. They would then take the southern kingdom captive. They would conquer Jerusalem in 586. So this is about 150 years before any of that is taking place. In fact, longer than 150 years, maybe 200 years before any of that is taking place. And yet Isaiah is seeing in his prophecy the rise of Babylon, and then he sees the fall, the eventual fall of Babylon, which happened through the Medo-Persian Empire. So Babylon is going to rise and then it will fall. And the king of Babylon, here called Lucifer, which means the day star. By the way, Lucifer is the only place in the Bible the word Lucifer is used, and it's not referring to Satan. It is referring to the king of Babylon, the day star. The day star is probably Venus and maybe one of the other planets at another time of year that rises in the morning and is the first star you see. It's the morning star. And it is the sign of a brand new day that is being ushered in. And of course, that's what the kings of the earth claim. They always claim when they come to power that they will bring in a brand new day of unprecedented peace and prosperity to the world. That's what all these superpower rulers always promise. That's what all rulers promise. And of course, it never happens because men are sinful. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so we must never put our faith in worldly leaders or worldly kingdoms or governments to bring in this unprecedented age of peace, which in our hearts we all desire. Now, I'm rambling a bit, but these are all the themes that we read about in these chapters this morning. And so let's go through a couple of them. It shall come to pass in the day the Lord gives you rest from your sorrow and from your fear and the hard bondage in which you were made to serve, that you will take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, how the oppressor has ceased, the golden city ceased. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. He who struck the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he who ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and no one hinders. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. So here we are reading about the fall of Babylon and how that will bring peace. Because why? Because it is the ruler of Babylon who ruled the nations with a rod of iron, and particularly ruled over God's people with severity. It was the king of Babylon that burned Jerusalem, burned the temple, and carried them away captive. And Isaiah then goes on to speak about how hell itself, that is populated with many fallen great men of history, was eagerly waiting for the king of Babylon and his people to come to them as they all died and were conquered. And then he addresses the king of Babylon, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. Okay, and on we could read it. So here is the king of Babylon saying, I will arise. I am the morning star. I am the one who will bring in an unprecedented reign of peace to the earth, but I will have all power. I will even sit on the mount, on that mount of congregation. I will conquer Jerusalem, and I will be the one that will reign, not this kingdom of Israel. Now, this is interesting. Why? Because it was Genesis chapter 11, I believe, in the land on the plains of Shinar, which is where Babylon was, where the captives were carried to the city Babylon. What else happened there? Well, the first one world government was attempted there on the plains of Shinar, and there it was called Babel. Same place as Babylon. It's exactly the same place. Babel, of course, this tower they were going to build where they were going to rule from there, so that men would not be scattered throughout the earth. Here we will establish a capital city that will rule the whole earth. And God said, no, you won't, and confused their languages. Here in Babylon now, the king of Babylon says, in exactly the same physical location, I will rule. I am the morning star. I will bring in an unprecedented level of peace as I rule the earth. And of course, God is saying, no, you won't. Now, why is this all important for us? Because if you read the book of Revelation, exactly the same themes are brought up. There is going to be an antichrist who arises in the Middle East who will usher in a one world government. He will rule the entire earth. And for 3.5 years, it will appear that this will be a kingdom of peace, that this will be a reign of peace. And it will be promised that this will be good for the earth. And of course it won't be, because at the end of that first 3.5 period then begins, we see the true colors of this antichrist, this leader. And an unprecedented level of persecution will begin for the church. And many people will be martyred in that time. And of course it is this one world government that then the return of Jesus destroys. Okay, so where does Babylon come in the book of Revelation? Well, it is at that time that this one world government somehow will have a capital city, which is called Babylon in the book of Revelation, which will be the center of all economic prosperity and trade and control. The entire financial system of the world will be controlled from this capital city, and it will make many people rich, this capital city. And somehow there is an economic calamity at the end of this 7-year rule of the Antichrist and his religious sidekick. Babylon will fall. And just as we see the nations rejoicing at the fall of this Babylon, so there God says to his people, rejoice that this great Babylon, this great financial system has fallen. And it's in that financial system that those who don't have the name of the number of the beast, that's of the number of a man, 666 somehow, whatever that means, we don't know. It'll become clear at the end of times. On their foreheads or on their wrists, they won't be able to trade. You won't be able to buy or sell without bearing the mark of this man, this Antichrist. And of course, we as Christians are commanded not to receive that name, and we will suffer for it. All of these things are told to us in advance and typified in this kind of smaller prophecy of Isaiah. So yesterday I said to you that prophecy for the prophets is a bit like the silhouette of several mountain ranges that kind of look like a single mountain range with many peaks to them, like it was all happening at the same time, but actually it's separated by time, these peaks. Now, there's a further complication to that oftentimes the same peak, exactly the same shape, is mirrored by a peak before it, but they're perfectly in line with one another. And actually, what you see happening here is mirrored by something that happens many, many years later, but it's exactly the same things that are happening. There's a kingdom called Babylon. There's a king of that kingdom who will rule with absolute power, and then he will fall. He will come down, and the city will come down with him. And then many, many years later, at the end of time, there's this one world government, and it is ruled by a person who claims to be the usher of a great kingdom of peace, but he will fall as the Messiah comes in. So these are things which we see repeated as there are many types that are fulfilled by the major antitype at the end of time. Okay, so what can we take out of today? Don't put your confidence in governments. I'm not saying don't vote. Vote. Be a good citizen of your country. Do what you can for the good of the nation that you live in. But don't put your hope in any government, in any world leader, in any president of any nation. Don't put your hope in that. That's not what is going to save this world and bring in peace and prosperity. Just forget about that. In fact, the Bible tells us things are going to get worse. History is moving towards the re-establishment of a Babylon, a city of massive financial power in the world that exerts and controls the economy of the entire world, where a one world government will be established under a man who hates God and who hates Christians. And it's going to turn out very badly for the church in that time. And yet, when Jesus returns, he will throw that. The first human being to enter hell will be the Antichrist and his religious sidekick, this false prophet. They will be thrown into hell, and then Jesus will set up his millennium kingdom. And we will rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. And so, this is the final thing that I want to say. In the book of Revelation, Jesus says, I am the bright and morning star. Put no confidence in any ruler in this world to usher in a period of wonderful peace and prosperity in which we can delight. That will never happen. The one who brings in the age of peace and prosperity in his kingdom is Jesus Christ, and it is going to be a kingdom of 1,000 years when we rule and reign with him. He is the bright and morning star, and until he comes, no leader will fill that role. And we are to watch and pray and be patient through persecution and expect it. That's important. You want to be a Christian. That is something you have to come to terms with. We are heading towards a great and final rising of a Satan-inspired kingdom of men where they think they can rule this world, where men will seek ultimate power and one man will achieve it. That's what we're heading towards in history. And persecution of the church. And you've got to expect it and be ready for it. And if you stand firm, if you endure, you will reign with Christ. So God bless you. So it leaves you thinking, gee, do I want to live at the time of the return of Jesus? I mean, we do cry in our hearts, Lord, come, Lord Jesus. And yet, if we are those who are alive at the return of Jesus, it means that we are those and our children who will live through this tyrannical reign of a man who will slaughter countless Christians. Do I want to live through that? I do want Jesus to return. And I just pray that if I am alive at that time, that he will give me grace to be faithful through it all. And I pray that you too will. So God bless you. See you tomorrow.